I'm going to get started. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for your patience. This is council meeting number 18. We're here on Wednesday, March 15th at 6:30 p.m. And I am going to call the meeting to order. I just want to remind people who might be listening that there is free public skating all week, and there are some additional skating times because, of course, many of us parents have kids who are on spring break this week. So I just want to make sure those who may be listening or watching understand that there's some additional activities at the municipality. Apart from that, I think we're all praying for good weather in the coming weeks and are pleased to see the sun today, but it would be nice if it got a little warmer. I'm going to call the meeting to order and invite one of my council colleagues to read our land acknowledgement. I'd like to express regrets on behalf of Councillor Doreen O'Sullivan, who isn't here this evening. I will invite Councillor Wilson to read the land acknowledgement.
The municipality of North Granville acknowledges that the municipality operates on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. We honor the historic relationship of the Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Granville their home. We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Great, thank you. So, colleagues, we have the agenda before you. I think this evening we are strictly dealing with planning matters. So I'll look to a mover and a seconder for the agenda, please. Councillor Barclay, Councillor Strachan, thank you. Any comments or questions on the agenda as presented? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor, please. Good, we have an agenda. Disclosures of interest, any disclosures, colleagues, in terms of perceived or real financial benefit or loss deriving from discussions this evening? Seeing no disclosures, we'll move on. Under the consent agenda, we just have one item, which is the adoption of council meeting minutes from February 15th. I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the singular item under our consent agenda, please. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Strachan, thank you. Any comments or questions on our February 15th meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Good, thank you. So we'll go straight to planning. We have a number of zoning bylaw amendments. As a consequence, I will now move to convene our first public meeting. Is that right, Ms. Martin?
That is correct. So we've done an updated blurb for your worship to read out. So we'll just read it once at the start of every public meeting as to our procedure, and then we'll move into opening the first public meeting, which is for 2024 Asa Street.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is legally prescribed text, as many of you know. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendments for the following properties: 2024 Asa Street and 5 Queen Street. This meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to a proposed zoning bylaw amendment. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before council adopts a proposed amendment, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any person wishing further notice of council's decision can give their name, address, and postal code to our Director of Planning. Following the presentation from staff for each matter being considered, council will hear from the applicant, followed by members of the public who can speak obviously for or against. Following comments from the public, the applicant will be offered an opportunity to respond to questions raised. Is there anyone here for either of the public meetings? Not seeing anyone. Thank you. Please be advised, in any case, that any member of the public who should wish to provide written comment regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendments can do so after the public meeting is adjourned. Written comment can be received up until the zoning bylaw amendment is considered by council. It is intended that council will consider both zoning bylaw amendments this evening after this public meeting. Council members may also, of course, wish to ask questions through the chair. So with that, I'm going to open the first public meeting, which is 2024 Asa Street, and I'll pass it over to Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Right, so our first amendment tonight is to consider a zoning bylaw amendment for 2024 Asa Street. Oh, now it's catching up. Hillary, you just might want to advance for me. Sorry, it's kind of wonky, and I was fidgeting around with it all night. So a little bit of background on this application. So the municipality received a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the address at 2024 Asa Street to add a definition for a multi-dwelling unit and address some site-specific provisions in regards to the existing multi-unit and a proposed severance on the property. If council recalls, official plan number 8 was approved on August 2nd, 2022, which permitted an increase in the density of 73 units per gross hectare. So the official plan amendment was required to come first to allow for that density to be increased to maintain that existing multi-dwelling unit, but also allow for the severance of the underutilized land of the property. Severance application file number B12722 is currently seeking to sever off that underutilized portion of the property to create a new opportunity for a single detached dwelling. Next slide, please. So this is just the location of the property. It's at the southwest corner of Asa and Thomas Street. Next slide, please. And the attached sketch demonstrates how the property will be severed, the proposed new frontage for the single detached lot, for the single detached dwelling, and then demonstrates setbacks as well. Next slide, please. So staff undertook a policy review of the proposed development against the provincial policy statement. So our policy statement does identify that healthy, livable, and safe communities are sustained by accommodating an appropriate and affordable and market-based range of mix of residential types. We also have housing policies within the provincial policy statement that encourage both market and based and affordable housing, and encourage municipalities to establish minimum targets for the provision of housing. Next slide, please. Mimicking the provincial policy statement, the United Counties official plan provides policy direction to support the creation of affordable housing and establishes that affordable and accessible, that housing is affordable and accessible to low and moderate income households. And it's also their policy that we encourage that new housing is affordable and available and accessible to a broader range of demographics. So in this case, we have an existing multi-dwelling unit that's already being rented out by members of the public, and some of them, I believe, are more longer-term tenants of the building. So that's still being maintained through this development application. Within our own official plan, if we go to the next slide, please. As mentioned, official plan number 8 established a maximum density increase in the property to 73 units. And then it's also our policy that we concentrate our growth within our existing serviced area and provide opportunities for infill and intensification. So if we go to the next slide, you will see a breakdown of the zoning bylaw amendment that is being proposed. It will put the property to an R3 zone category. A multiple dwelling unit consisting of 5 dwelling units is being added as a permitted use on the retained lot. And then there's some site-specific provisions that recognize existing conditions of the dwelling unit itself. It is quite close to Thomas Street already. That's, again, it's an older building, so we're just recognizing those standards, as well as the increased density provisions. If we go to the next slide, we're also adding in, just to recognize some site specifics through the severance, which is a reduced lot frontage of 12.1 meters for the single detached dwelling and a minimum lot area of 334 square meters. So those would recognize the severed lot. We have received no comments from any members of the public at this time, and there were no concerns and no objections on the part of Rideau Valley Conservation. And I do want to note that the applicant, Mr. Howard, is here this evening should you have any questions. But to that end, we'll go to the next slide. And it is staff's recommendation that council approve the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the property to the residential third density exception to allow for the subdivision of the lot through a severance and recognize those site-specific zoning standards to allow for that creation of the infill residential lot. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions from members of council, I'd be happy to entertain them. And like I did mention, Mr. Howard is here if there are any questions for him.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Howard is, who is Mr. Howard? Oh, hi. It's okay. You don't need to come down right now. But if you wish to address council, you're more than welcome. So thank you, Ms. Martin, for your presentation. So am I to understand that there's a multi-residential property building already in place, and the land is being severed to allow for a single residential dwelling? Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the affordability provisions are being recognized through the existing multi-residential building. Is that the case?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not, through that process, it will remain, so those units that are currently rented out
Okay.
are there, so we're not reducing our housing stock in that way.
Excellent. Okay. And I have one more question. I'll defer to council colleagues. Why is the recommendation for that the rezoning of the severed property? Just give me your rationale for the designation, the zoning designation on those lands.
So we're maintaining the general zoning within the area, which is R3, but so the R3 zoning standard does allow for a single detached dwelling as a permitted use.
Gotcha.
But through this zoning exception, just again, maintain, like, not to have like an R1 zone pocket, but we're just allowing for the reduced frontage requirements and lot area as required as per the R1 zone standard, which is reflected and recognized in the residential third density standard.
Okay. So that residential third density exception 25 is a somewhat standard zoning provision on that street? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's a special exception zone that's being created because the minimum lot frontage in the R1 zone is 15 meters, and they're going down to 12.1 meters for
Gotcha.
lot frontage.
Okay.
And then the lot area is being decreased from 425 square meters to 334, I believe, around
Okay.
there. So they're looking at, creating, the other zone standards would apply still for things like in regards to setbacks from lot lines and lot coverage in line with what would be the residential first density zone, because that's where the provisions are for single detached dwellings. But again, it's creating that opportunity for that infill lot for an additional house.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions, council colleagues, on this one? Okay. Okay. Mr. Howard, would you like to address council, or are you okay? Okay. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Final question then, Ms. Martin, did we get comments from the public on this?
We did not.
Okay.
There were comments, if council recalls, during the official plan amendment process, but none of the comments that were provided through that process came forward through this process.
Okay. And is it a similar notification process?
The exact same process, yes.
The exact same process?
Yes.
Okay. And the nature of the concerns expressed previously?
During the official plan amendment process, I think it was concern on certain tenants about the loss of the space
Yeah.
that they use.
Okay. And was that addressed in any form?
Not through the planning process.
Okay. Okay. So it was just access to additional lands, right, that would now be severed, right, to accommodate the
Yeah. single
residential unit. And our obligation to those tenants isn't to provide that additional space, is that correct?
No, we do have zone standards in regards to like landscaped open space, and
Yeah.
there still is
Sufficient space.
there's still sufficient space in line with our zoning bylaw.
Great.
And then there's municipally funded parks within the area as well,
Yes.
such as Riverside.
Okay. So you deemed the remaining amenity space to be acceptable? That's what I'm trying to
That is correct.
ask.
Yes, when we reviewed it against
Yep.
the zoning bylaw.
Perfect. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I will close the public meeting, and we will move to the recommendation on Asa Street, which is that council approve and enact bylaw 3023 to rezone the lands located at 2024 Asa Street, Campbell, from residential third density to residential third density exception 25. Okay. So with that in mind, colleagues, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor, seconder, Councilor Strachan, thank you. Any last comments or questions, colleagues? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? Okay. Thank you. I think that concludes this matter. Is that right? Okay.
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Howard, for being here. Appreciate your efforts. Good luck on the building of, I presume, a new home. Is that right? Good. Okay. Well, we're happy to see that you remain invested in the downtown, so that's awesome. Okay, we'll move on then, and that is we're going to open the public meeting for 2022 5 Queen Street and look to Ms. Martin for that presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. So our next amendment being considered this evening is for 5 Queen Street. We'll just go to the next slide. So the municipality received a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the property at 5 Queen Street to permit an 8-unit apartment dwelling. The subject land is an existing lot of record within the downtown designation of the official plan and is zoned downtown commercial. And if we go to the next slide, Hillary is great. She's on it. You'll see just in the blue outline there, that's where the lot's located. So it's just one lot in from Rideau Street. It's bordered by, you've got Bayfield Manor, and then you've got a townhouse unit complex immediately to the west, and there are some single detached dwellings across the street. There's a laundromat and a fitness studio, as well as just a general commercial office on the east and south of the property. Next slide, please. So here's the proposed sketch, and it's so hard to fit everything into a PowerPoint slide, but it was included within the report. And as you will see, there's a proposal for a 3-story, 8-unit building with 9 parking spots on site. There is also bicycle parking, so it's unfortunate that Councillor Sullivan is here because I know she's very passionate about bicycles and bicycle parking. There will be a proposed parking space within the front yard, and there are some zoning exceptions being sought to permit that. And then level of detail on the slide is what you don't see is some of the stormwater management pieces. There will be a swale on the eastern side of the property, and I do have a slide that speaks to that. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just quickly walk council through some of the policy considerations that are considered. And again, our provincial policy statement provides that healthy, livable, and safe communities are sustained by accommodating an appropriate and affordable and market-based range of mix of residential types, as well as that encouraging of affordable housing to meet the current and future needs of residents. If we go to the next slide, under the county's official plan, similar policies, again, encouraging us to provide affordable and accessible housing, and as well as encouraging proponents to ensure that a portion of new housing is affordable and available to a broader range of demographics. And there is a proposal with this development for some affordable units, which I'll get into later in the presentation. If we go to the next slide, some additional policies from the county's official plan in regard to our urban settlement areas is that we there to be the focus of growth and accommodate a broad range of uses, and then provide for the municipal servicing piece and encouraging affordable housing and alternative housing forms designed to be to help create more walkable communities. And then it talks about cost-effective development patterns and those which minimize land consumption and reduce servicing. They are encouraged. And so this property is located on municipal services within the downtown area of the municipality. So in our own official plan, this property is technically designated downtown commercial, which permits a full range of commercial activities, and it does permit residential uses, including accessory residential units and multi-residential developments. So generally, these are encouraged to be located above commercial storefronts. However, we do allow for standalone residential uses as long as they're not located on Prescott Street or Clothier Street, which is kind of more of that traditional downtown with your commercial that are more right up to the sidewalk. So in staff's review, we also looked at the density. So we generally have a 45 gross units per hectare policy, but we do allow for increases in the downtown in accordance with section 14.2 of our plan, and that is in exchange for some community benefits such as affordable housing. If we go to the next slide. Our housing policies require where a development is to occur on a site that we do have certain provisions in regards to mix of units. Now the site is not more than 2 hectares, but I wanted to point out that it is helping us achieve a greater mix and diversity of housing within the municipality. I also wanted to point out that we do have our policy in regards to 25% of all new residential development be affordable, and that this is one of the many factors that we utilize when evaluating projects for housing affordability. Next slide, please. So this a lot of text and information on this slide, but what I wanted to point out here is that staff undertook a review of our zone standards to identify where variances were needed from our residential fourth density zoning standard. And to that end, I do recognize that this is an existing lot of record, so certain requirements, just by virtue of the lot already existing, fell short of the zone standards. So the zoning bylaw amendment will recognize those deficient areas, including the lot frontage, which is required to be 30 meters, but the lot is only 20. So we're just going to recognize that. We're looking for a reduced interior yard setback to 1.5 meters. Now that reduction will be along the property line shared with the commercial development, not with the residential development or the Bayfield Manor. In terms of lot coverage, we're still under the 40%. We're recognizing that this is an increase of density on the property in accordance with our official plan policies. And there is a request to reduce the parking requirement down by 1 space. But I will note that the property owner and the developer have entered into an agreement with a neighboring commercial land owner to have one of their visitor parking spaces be accommodated on that lot. So the residents within the building would all have a parking space, and then visitor parking would be accommodated on an adjacent lot that's currently being used for commercial purposes. I think it's important to note that the building will be under the 14-meter height requirement at 12.93 meters. So they're not maximizing the building to the full height. And then I'm going to get into, if we just go to the next slide, just those zone standards. So these are the metrics that are being pulled out that we're recognizing. And if we go to the next slide, it just more so speaks to the parking requirements. So our general provisions for parking have some additional set standards that we're looking for some relief from as well. So the zoning bylaw amendment will incorporate those, including permitting a parking space within the front yard, reducing setbacks from parking spaces and driveways to a habitable window, and then the minimum setback from a parking space to a property line is being reduced as well. When we're reviewing this, and I know questions have been raised by some members of council, and just that this isn't the only development where we seem to be varying a lot of these standards in regards to our parking requirements. So certainly staff will be keeping that in mind when we do another review of the zoning bylaw to see if there's some better standards that we can start incorporating to try and move away from always coming into conflict with more so of our parking general requirements when it comes to these multi-residential developments. It just seems like, especially on our infill sites, they tend to lend themselves to being unique, but I think there's some opportunity there to improve upon that. If we go to the next slide, the developer is proposing to have 2 of the 8 units as affordable. The province of Ontario defines affordable rent as being 80% of the average market rent, and this is to be established by the province annually through a bulletin that they will publish, and that the municipality will work with the developer to get an agreement in place for those 2 affordable units. Next slide, please. Site plan control is something I just wanted to just raise to council, as Bill 23 has made some changes to those processes. Site plan control will not be required for the site, as the province has removed the ability of municipalities to regulate site development where there are 10 or less residential units. But what I really appreciated was that the developer did provide some comments around site grading and drainage and stormwater management, as this often becomes a concern of residents when there is an infill development that presents itself next door. So as mentioned, there will be a swale that's designed at the east side of the property to help with flows. So site grading has been designed in a manner to accommodate the flows from the adjacent properties to the north and west as they sit higher than the development. So when you're on site, you can visibly tell that this property is a lower lying property. And they will be directed to the roadside ditch and away from the proposed building to ensure that there's no negative impacts. The drainage on the west side of the property will flow through a curb opening where it will enter a grass swale and discharge to the roadside ditch. And on the east side of the development, there will be a grass swale complete with landscape catch basin and perforated pipe. So this ensures water from the back parking area will drain towards the roadside ditch and stay away from the property to the east, and that no storm runoff from the property will be directed to adjacent properties. And what I do want to note for council is that we still have due diligence at the building permitting stage to ensure that we aren't negatively impacting other properties through that grading and drainage piece. So that is a component in our urban areas that we do look at as part of a building permit submission.
I ask,
Yep.
while you're at it, Who assumes responsibility for the establishment of the new culvert that is referred to on this slide?
That would be as part of the property development site. Like, when they develop the property, they would install the culvert as part
They
of their
would
site
install the
works.
culvert.
Yep.
So it's at the developer's expense?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And who would ensure that that culvert is adequately sized and properly established?
So we do have an entrance permit requirement as part of the building permit submission, so that would go to Public Works, and then Public Works would oversee that the proper specifications are provided to the property owner.
Okay. I'll let you complete your presentation, and maybe
Yeah.
we could get additional comment from the representatives in the room.
Of
Do we
course,
have any
yes.
here? Okay,
Yep.
great, thanks.
So the next slide is just a duplication of the site plan, because sometimes I find it's of benefit to have. Next slide, we don't have any public comments. We didn't receive any public comments prior to the submission. I did get an email just asking for a neighbor to be notified of the decision of council, but they had no comments to provide. The Conservation Authority had no objections to the proposed amendment. Next slide, it's our recommendation that council approves the proposed zoning amendment to rezone the property to a residential fourth density zone to permit the development of the 8-unit apartment building. And to that end, I will note that Mr. Robinson is here. He is the planner on file, as well as the developers, who can answer any questions that you might have related to the development. And council, if there's any questions for planning staff on our item, happy to answer.
My question remains outstanding, but I'll let you go ahead, Deputy Mayor, and then we can figure it out. The question on the establishment of the new culvert. Okay, but feel free to go ahead, and then maybe we can get Mr. Robinson to come up.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the applicant and for some consideration to the stormwater management, which I appreciate. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin, regarding the parking, in particular the front yard parking, when you establish off-the-street front yard parking, you effectively eliminate an on-street parking space. So I'm wondering, first of all, do our parking requirements account for sort of on-street parking? I mean, we require a certain ratio of parking, but we don't count the on-street parking as being eligible in that ratio.
Through your worship to the Deputy Mayor, so in regards to residential development, no, there, I believe, some provisions in regards to on-street parking allowances for commercial developments within the downtown, but that wouldn't be a consideration, just given that we do have bylaws that regulate overnight parking in the wintertime, so you wouldn't, from an operational standpoint, want to create an on-street site, parking spot for residential use, just because it would be intended that their car would be there longer term.
So just a follow-up question might go to the applicant. Would they consider having access to that front yard parking off the driveway so that we could preserve one on-street parking spot? Thanks.
Welcome, Mr. Robinson, is that right?
Okay, thank you. The design of that front yard parking space, that is the handicap parking space, and I understand what the deputy mayor is saying, that then there would be sort of two cuts in the ability to have street parking there, because we've got an area that's it's 3.3 meters wide, which is the driveway coming in off the street that is the access for all but one of the parking spaces, and then the other one is the handicap parking space, and then there's a little bit of asphalt at the side, so the person in the handicap parking space has got a dedicated spot to get through. It's removing, I guess, in total you've got about 8 meters of a cut, so it would be the length of about 1.5 parking spaces where you couldn't have street parking now. I don't know how much long-term street parking there is needed on that street, but all the times I've been there, I've never seen cars parked on Queen Street itself much in the way. And one item that was just raised by Ms. Martin in her presentation was about the fact that we are providing, or we've entered into an agreement, the owners have entered into an agreement with the property owner to the east regarding off-site parking, and that would be for the visitors, and it's actually 2 spots that they have secured an arrangement with. So what we have is we've got 8 units, and we've got 9 parking spaces on site, and of the 9, 8 of them are standard parking spaces, and 1 is a handicap spot. And then the 2 spots that are off-site would be for visitors. So there won't be residents who have their car at this property that will be parking off-site.
Thanks, I understand it, but I guess my question, to be a little bit clearer, is could that be perpendicular, could that front parking be perpendicular to the driveway so that we aren't losing that 1.5 parking
It could be, it would
space?
change some of the ability in the front yard to have a reasonable area of front yard landscaping that way. So I don't think there's any issue with what's before you tonight in terms of the zoning, because I don't think it changes any of the zoning exceptions that are being sought. It doesn't change the number, and it doesn't change any of the setbacks. So that is something that we could work with Ms. Martin on.
Okay, thank you. Just, if I might, Madam Mayor, ask one more question directed to Director Martin. In terms of an agreement, do we have a standard agreement concerning affordable units? I note from another application that it expired after 10 years. Do we use the same criteria to ensure affordability?
So the municipality has a standard agreement that we've put together for site plan agreements. The agreement will need to be amended to be a little more fulsome because it's included as part of a schedule of a site plan agreement. It hasn't been stipulated as of yet because we've yet to have those provisions entrenched through an agreement in regard to the timeline of that affordability piece. The other unknown factor at this time, and I've yet to get clarification from the ministry on, is there was also the ability of the ministry to enforce a standard agreement that all municipalities had to use in regards to affordable housing. So I'm not certain if they're going to move forward with that or if it's still going to be within the rights of the municipality to enter into those agreements on our own. But that would be a term that I would work with the developers on to understand what that timeline is and report back to council prior to that agreement being executed.
Okay, so just returning to the culvert question, Mr. Robinson, could you take that?
So you wanted to know whose responsibility the culvert is? That
Yes.
would be something that would be, we would have to design and get approval through the building permit process, because we're still going to have to do a grading plan for this project through the building permit process
Okay. It's a 3-story building, is that
Yes.
what I understand? Okay,
with a basement.
with the basement, okay. And then there's no real impact on other residential backyards, is that correct, from what I see?
It's not really evident, and what I'm looking at in front of me is that to the north is the seniors' retirement home and their parking lot, and that's at a much higher grade elevation, so they are above this. To the east is the rear yard parking of the commercial buildings,
Yes.
and to the west is the end unit of a townhouse development, but and the backyard of this building does not abut the backyard of any single-family homes.
Okay, great, that's good. And I'm curious to know on the part of the applicants, what brings them to want to build in North Grenville? Perhaps they want to speak on their own behalf, or you can speak for them.
This is, the owners own some other properties. The other ones I believe they own are in the city of Ottawa, and this was a property that became available, and they wanted to invest in the community.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate that commitment to both the 2 affordable units, so thank you very much for that. I think you know that this council is very preoccupied with affordable housing, and I think the location is very appropriate for, is it 8 units, a total of 8?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add? You'd have to come to the mic.
What attracted us to North Grenville, like a good friend of ours is a builder, and I believe he was part of the group that built the
Great. It's always nice to see smaller builders, as well as some of the larger builders have an interest in the community. So I know sometimes the scrutiny is on some of the larger builders, but to see some smaller builders and developers want to do some of that well-designed infill is I think, a good and positive way forward. So thank you for your interest. I'm a hockey mom. I just came from a full day of hockey in Ottawa. My son, who's 11, played on the 67s ice as part of a All-Stars game, and then we watched the 67s game. So I appreciate all the time you've spent in rinks, Kemptville and otherwise. So, okay, I don't have any other questions, colleagues. Is there anything else that comes up here? Okay. Okay, so then if there are no other questions, I'll close the public meeting. And again, Ms. Martin, you're confirming that you've really received no concern on the part of the public. Fantastic. Okay, so the recommendation is that council approve and enact bylaw 31-23 to rezone the lands located at 5 Queen Street from downtown commercial C1 to residential fourth density, exception 17, R4 17, to permit the development of an 8-unit multi-residential apartment building. Looking for a mover and seconder, please. Deputy Mayor, seconder, please. Councillor Wilson, thank you. And in the absence of no other questions or interventions, I will call the vote. All in favor, please. Thank you. So welcome to North Granville. You got your work cut out for you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. So we'll move on. Ms. Martin, you're providing just a supplemental report for the South Core.
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship. Let's go to the next slide. So just a reminder to council and the public as to where the property is located. It's just north of Pellison's Corners. A portion of the property is located inside the settlement area, while majority of it is outside. And the map in front of you, I was diligent this time and put a legend so everyone can understand what each of the hatching areas mean. So as you can see, the kind of that like circle hatched area, that's the mineral aggregate resource as identified on the property. And as you can see, there is wetland to the west, and that's the buffer area around it. My mic went off. So the property is 99 acres in size. It's designated agriculture, mineral aggregate, hamlet, and provincially significant wetland. It's currently zoned agriculture 1, environmental protection, and residential first density. And surrounding land uses are agricultural, residential, and forested. Next slide. So the proposed amendment, staff went back after the public meeting and provided some reconsideration as to how we could address the residents' concerns that were being raised in regards to the preservation zoning for aggregate. So staff are proposing that we revise the zoning category to agriculture to holding. So what that would do is it would limit any development outside of agriculture to be permitted within that area, so it still achieves the intent of what we're trying to achieve through the protection of that resource. So if we go to the next map, the next slide, there's a map. This is the United Counties aggregate mapping on the property. There is, so the secondary is the yellow, and the brown area, which is a lot of, is considered tertiary reserves, tertiary aggregate. So the United Counties, if we go to the next slide, their official plan came into effect in 2016, and that's when we had to conform to their policy layer, and that'll come in later. When in 2018, our official plan is updated, and now that reserve is placed on the property. I did some digging into that consideration because there's a lot of questions in regards to the master plan that the counties are undertaking in regard to the aggregate resources. So there is policy recommendations to create a 500-meter buffer around settlement areas. However, since the plan has not been adopted, the municipality hasn't had to incorporate those standards into their official plan at this time. The matter was deferred by County Council on February 24th, 2022, and the matter has been deferred indefinitely, and there's no timeline for when it will be reconsidered. The proposed zoning amendment, as it stands, would preserve the 29 acres of mineral aggregate on the property. And staff just did a bit of an analysis using that 500-meter buffer. So say if that 500-meter buffer was in effect today, there would still be about 16 acres on the property designated as mineral aggregate reserve. So there would be an impact with that 500-meter buffer in reducing the number of acres, but there would still be aggregate on the property as identified that from a policy perspective we need to protect. Next slide, please. So the proposed amendment one of the concerns that was raised by members of the public was that the mineral aggregate preservation zoning would make it easier for a mineral aggregate operation to establish. Staff don't hold that opinion. It's no different from a process standpoint, whether it's zoned agriculture 2 with a holding or mineral aggregate preservation. And anyone wishing to establish a mineral aggregate operation on the property would still be required to go through the process through the Aggregate Resources Act and would still be required to apply for a zoning amendment to establish that use. And again, it's that protecting of the area identified as having potential just preserves it in the event that someone one day down the road does the research to say that yes, there is potential to extract this resource. These resources are finite in location and are one of the most highly protected resources through our provincial policy statement. Next slide, please. So this is the current zoning bylaw, and one of the questions that was raised by Councillor Strachan at the last meeting was, where is the location of other aggregate reserve within the area? And we had discussed, without being able to provide the mapping at the time, just given the limitation of our technology in the room. So the map shows that green area, that light green, that MXAP, is quite prevalent already on the east side of County Road 22, with a small portion of the property having that preservation zoning there. So the proposed zoning amendment would, it's still going in through the A2 zoning, will reflect that preservation zone on the west side of 22. Next slide, please. And just adding some zoning context, in our 2010 official plan included a small portion, as was shown on that map on the last slide, of the property as having mineral aggregate. Our comprehensive zoning bylaw came into effect in 2012, and that zoning map reflected our 2010 schedules. 2016, the counties passed their first official plan identifying the tertiary reserve. So when we updated our schedule in 2018, that's when the mineral aggregate reserve was added more in detail and more depth on the subject lands. So to that end, that's kind of where we ended up today. When the severance came forward was we need to reflect, our zoning needs to reflect the official plan layer, and the condition was added that the mineral aggregate reserve be protected. So typically after an official plan amendment is passed, we do a zoning schedule update so that our schedules are reflective of the official plan schedule, and that did not occur, so that's why we have this gap in regards to the zoning schedule. And if we go to the next slide, we did receive a further comment after the public meeting in relation to our public notification requirements for the zoning amendment. Staff circulated the report and the draft bylaw through to members of the community, providing an update as to the revised recommendation in the zoning category. There were emails of thank yous and satisfaction that the A2 zoning alleviates many of the concerns that the residents had with the mineral aggregate preservation zone. So they felt that the municipality had taken the effort to just listen to them and hear their concerns in regards to the mineral aggregate preservation zone, and by putting it in a different zoning category, we're still able to achieve that same end. So if we go to the final slide, it's my recommendation that council enact a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the rezoning of the property from agriculture 1 to agriculture 2 holding. And that ends my presentation.
Great, thank you, Ms. Martin. I just have a quick question on the timing and trajectory of the 2016 United Counties official plan. You then refer to the 2018 official plan, and I assume you mean ours? So
That's
we have
correct.
we have the adoption of a 2016 counties official plan, which identified tertiary resources on the majority of the property in identified this evening. Is that correct? When you say majority of the property, you mean the property in question. Is that right?
That is correct, and it's the area that's going to be put into the A2 holding zone. It's about 29 acres in size, and it aligns with our mineral aggregate reserve designation within our official plan. It doesn't expand it beyond that. It doesn't. The zoning doesn't match the county's tertiary mapping. It recognizes our official plan, which is a smaller area.
Smaller footprint. A housekeeping amendment did not occur to update the municipality's zoning schedule to conform to the 18 official plan. In plain language, what does that mean?
So, thank you, Your Worship. So after the adoption of an official plan, usually within a year, staff are to bring forward a zoning bylaw amendment. We consider it a housekeeping in that it's an amendment brought forward by staff. And it should have occurred in that we would have taken our updated schedules, identified where there was land use designation changes through the official plan. So in this case, there was an update on this property where some of the property was identified as having mineral aggregate potential. So back in 2018, when the official plan was approved, there should have been a zoning bylaw amendment that would have brought in those new areas that had aggregate reserve put on there and updated to put into that preservation zoning, similar to what's across the street.
Okay, and I understand that the 2016 United Counties official, the establishment of the 2016 United Counties official plan, which included the identification of some tertiary resources, was largely a desktop exercise, and there were certainly a couple of property owners who contested the validity of the identification, right, of tertiary resources. Is that a fair statement?
I wasn't here at the time when they did the 2016 county official plan, but it's partially desktop exercises, but it's also based off of data that comes from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. In regards to like further ground truthing, any individual interested in developing a property for an aggregate resource, they would do additional studies where they would determine, what is the viability of that resource. So we very well could have properties where there is no, there's identified tertiary resource that's not viable to be extracted. But to go and do that, it's a very intensive project to go to each property and determine what's the depth of the resource that could be there. So it's based on, that scientific information that comes out of the ministry as well as some desktop exercise.
And so with that in mind, I would assume that both the 2016 United Counties official plan and 2018 municipal official plan applied a similar methodology to the identification of potential aggregate lands. Is that right?
They very well may have. That's kind of a standard
Yep.
operating procedure when you're dealing with the kind of a higher level policy document.
Yep.
And certainly if there's an individual that comes forward and does the work to determine there are no resources, here's my study that I've done, I'd like to remove that designation or that constraint on the property. It's certainly something that we would consider through a site specific amendment.
Excellent. I think that's the information I was looking for. Certainly at the United Counties, as you referred in your presentation, there's significant hesitation on the part of County Council to proceed without more of an in-depth understanding of the implications of designating a fairly high number of properties or areas as being aggregate rich, right, or having that potential for aggregate extraction. So you're right to highlight that at this point, County Council does not have an appetite to proceed with the formal establishment of that master plan. So with that in mind, I think it is important for property owners in the municipality of North Grenville to understand if they think they have been misdesignated through our own processes, which is the one that I understand applies right now, then they have some recourse. Do I have that right?
I'm just trying to understand the question, Your Worship. So is that in regards to if there's identified resources on the property that they don't believe are there?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple, not say simple process, but there is a process that they could go through that they would have to provide a study to demonstrate that, in fact, even though my property has been identified of having this resource on it, I've hired the technical expert to go out and survey the property, do the work, and they've determined that no, the resource is not viable for these reasons, and then we would have that, we would peer review that and work with the counties because it would also impact their layers as well.
Yes, perfect, thank you. And forgive me, colleagues, this is my last question. In the absence of the housekeeping amendment that arguably perhaps should have occurred but didn't in 2018, which of the two tertiary resource maps apply? Is it the counties or our own?
Both. So we have to conform to the United Counties official plan layers, and then we'd further refine based on certain factors. So proximity to the existing wetland, it appears based on, and again, not being here in 2018 when the official plan process was happening, it did look like at the time they created a bit of a buffer already from the residential area because it's a straight line across. So it looks like they tried to leave some room and not designate it down, because if you look at that mapping, the tertiary resource goes all through Pelton's Corners. That's just the scientific information that we have on where those, deposits may exist based on, a variety of factors that the ministry uses from a geological standpoint. But to that end, they both would apply. And in this case, because our zoning and our official plan don't line up, where we get an opportunity through a development application, we try to rectify that. But at this point, staff's recommendation would be is that we're going through another OP update, official plan update, but budgeted funds this year for it, and that once that's adopted, we'd include funds within the next budget year to have those official plan layers updated, the zoning layers updated to reflect the new official plan.
Okay, I think you'll leave it there. Council colleagues, anything else on this? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for going through that information that you've gleaned at the county table as far as who does what and whose official plan trumps our official plan, et cetera. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin, I'd just like to thank you for this supplemental report, and especially the communication with the residents who's expressed a lot of concern. I think it speaks to your thoroughness about the satisfaction that they expressed to you. It's well deserved. My question, and I think you might have answered it, but I just ask it in a different way. The county official plan 2016, I said it trumps our official plan, and it requires us to conform our official plan to their official plan. As well, what looks like didn't happen is that we have to enact some housekeeping to make sure our bylaws conform to our official plan. Now, in conversations with you, I know we've discovered other areas where our bylaws have not been updated to reflect the current official plan. So my question is there a time limit? You mentioned 2024 as being when we would enact these housekeeping bylaws, or we'd amend the existing bylaws to conform with our 2022 official plan, which we're going through that process this year. So I'm just curious, how did we miss updating our bylaws to our 2018 official plan?
So that happened under the previous leadership of the Planning and Development Department. So I can't really speak to why or why not the previous director didn't ensure that the schedules had been updated. So typically it's within 2 years of the passing of an official plan, the municipality needs to update its zoning bylaw to match the zoning schedules. I think the biggest impact has been the aggregate reserve piece, because there have been a few properties through the severance process that we do catch where they come through with the site-specific zoning to have it added back on. But just given how far gone we are from the 2018 and that we're about to endeavor on a new official plan, I think it'd be wise that we focus those resources in the future on, once the new official plan's in place, beginning that process immediately afterwards to ensure that we meet the province's timelines.
But there's no requirement that we need to update and conform to our official plan. There's no legislation that says we have to do it in 12 months or 24 months.
The Planning Act actually stipulates a 2-year timeline.
Well, it sounds to me like for residents who might be wary or concerned about the process, the lack of an implementation of a housekeeping bylaw actually provides North Granville with a little more latitude in terms of how lands are recognized. So I'm not, it is what it is at this stage. All I can tell you is every conversation I have on aggregate master planning is quite contentious, and there appear to be perceived winners and losers. So I think proceeding with an abundance of caution is likely very wise at this stage. So I'm glad that planning will be methodical, or planning staff will be methodical in how they bring some of that master planning to life. And at the county level, I can say with great confidence that the conversation will proceed at a snail's pace because there is so much concern. So I don't know if is anything else, colleagues, on this file. We appreciate, Ms. Martin, that you were able to respond, I think, to the concerns that residents were expressing alongside ourselves in a way that appears to be creative and gives new and perhaps some of our older residents in that area some comfort. So thank you for that. I know it meant a lot to the residents in that area. So with that, Council, the recommendation that Amy has presented is to approve and enact bylaw 3223 to permit the rezoning of a portion of the property legally described as concession 4, part of lot 7, former township of South Gore, from agricultural 1 zone to agricultural 2 holding zone to restrict development on a portion of the property that has mineral aggregate potential, only potential, as identified within the official plan. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please. Deputy Mayor, Councilor Wilson. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Thank you. That concludes our planning matters, colleagues. I think we've addressed all 3 bylaws, Ms. Chanot, is that right? Thank you. And thank you for stepping up this evening to clerk this meeting. We appreciate it. I do not see any questions. There are no members of the public in the audience and no media. And I assume, Ms. Janot, you haven't received anything via email? Okay. So we'll look to close the meeting. This is our confirmation bylaw. This is that bylaw 3322 to confirm proceedings of council at its regular meeting held on March 15, 2023, be adopted as passed. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councilor Strachan. Deputy Mayor, thank you. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. And a non-debatable motion to adjourn at 7:38. So that makes for a 59-minute meeting, colleagues. I'll look for a mover. Councilor Wilson. Deputy Mayor, resolution to adjourn at 7:38 p.m. Can I call the question? All in favor?